should you spend $2,699 on the Sony FX2 or get the Sony FX30 for $2,098? I'm going to tell you all the things you need to know. First things first, image quality. Both cameras oversample at 4K 24 and 30 frames per second. The FX30 reads about 6K of data and the FX2 reads out about 7K worth of data. Because of this, the FX2 wins out for oversampling more data. One thing I appreciate about both of these cameras is that you can import your own LUTs and burn them into your file or use them as a preview for your final footage. Personally, I prefer to burn in the look so that I don't spend as much time color grading every shot in post. In terms of low light, the FX2 is going to have an advantage over the FX30 just because of the bigger sensor, letting in more light. When it comes to cleaner shadows, the native ISO for the FX2 is at 800 and 4000, whereas the FX30 is 800 and 2500. When I film in church, it's not as noticeable with some decent lighting towards the front of our building. Regardless of the camera, I still use lenses that open up to at least f2.8 so I get as much light as possible. If you want to use higher frame rates though, you do need to watch out for something. At 4K 60 frames per second, the FX2 crops into Super 35 mode, but the FX30 stays uncropped. If you want to shoot at 4K 120, it's going to be cropped in again on the FX30 with a heavy 2.3 times crop. The FX2 on the other hand does not have 4K 20 at all. It only provides 120 frames per second at 1080p. If you want to shoot more slow motion and at higher frame rates, the FX30 is going to give you more options at 4K. I would have hoped for 4K 60 uncropped on the FX2, but it inherits the same limitation as the Sony a7 IV. I don't usually shoot in slow motion on either of these cameras, so 4K 24 and 4K 30 are just fine for me. When it comes to autofocus, you also have to decide if AI autofocus is important to you. The FX2 has newer AI-powered autofocus, with subject modes that are able to track insects, planes, and cars. Plus, there's the AI framing that auto-crops to keep you in the shot. So you shoot wide, and it tracks you with autofocus, or AI autofocus. The FX30 has real-time tracking and eye autofocus for humans and animals. So it's just missing those extra subject modes and that AI framing that the FX2 has. For my talking heads and church work, both of these cameras are great when it comes to autofocus. But if you want that security of being able to nail your focus, the FX2 is what you want to lean on. Usually I keep both of these cameras on tripods. But what if you want to film handheld? How stable are these cameras? While both of them have standard and active stabilization, the FX2 comes with an additional dynamic active stabilization mode. It doesn't give you gimbal smooth movement, but it does give you a more stable and locked off handheld kind of shot. When I tried panning it using focal ranges of 70 to 105 millimeters, the image tends to look a lot more jittery. I mostly use this on a tripod, but when I'm not and I just need a static shot, dynamic active mode is what I'll be using. And then if I need to do any pans or tilts, I'll switch to active stabilization. It's not a deal breaker, but it's great that the FX2 has dynamic stabilization. Although these cameras are both from Sony's FX line, there are still some things to note about the ergonomics. They both have a similar style body with video-friendly controls, plus multiple mounting points all around the camera. On the FX2, you will notice that there is an extra mounting point on the bottom, so that you can use Manfrotto style plates for more secure mounting. Plus, there's a dedicated EVF on the left-hand side that you can tilt up to 90 degrees. I love this for handheld shots because it can serve as a third point of contact. However, it does become awkward when packing it into camera bags because sometimes it just protrudes out. Both of these cameras have full-size HDMI as well as the same ports for microphone, headphone, USB-C, and micro USB. However, when it comes to storage, while both provide dual SD card slots, only the FX30 has a dual CF Express Type A slot, while the FX2 has only one. Pretty weird since you're paying more for the FX2. Internally, both have a fan that helps with overheating and preventing it. On the FX2, when it comes to switching between photo and video mode, there is a dedicated switch for that. Whereas on the FX30, you have to go through the menu to choose between photo and video mode. Thanks to Sony's update, both of these cameras have the Big 6 firmware update where it shows the frame rate, ISO, shutter speed, aperture, picture profile, and white balance. You can access this on the Sony FX2 with its own dedicated home button. But on the FX30, you need to assign this to a custom button. One of my favorite parts about the FX line is the zoom rocker. But since my lens isn't compatible with the zoom rocker, I just assign it for a clear image zoom. Now, if you want to get the most out of your camera like I do, let's talk about how these two cameras can shoot photo and video. For photography, the FX30 has an electronic shutter only, no viewfinder. For me, the big reason why I chose the FX30 is the mechanical shutter. This prevents the banding that I get from the LED lights in my church. The FX30's electronic shutter can't prevent that unless I'm shooting slower than 1/150th of a second. The FX2 has a 33 megapixel full frame sensor, which means you can maximize your lenses by punching in and still having a great image. The FX30 can't do that. Even though it's 26 megapixels, it's already shooting on a cropped sensor. Another downside is that the FX30 can't do things like burst mode like the FX2 can. And if you want to shoot burst mode, you just have to spam the shutter button. For photography, the Sony FX2 is the clear choice. What's it like to actually use both of these cameras on the day-to-day? Both of these cameras share the same Sony Z battery that lasts a bit over an hour when recording in 4K 24. Because of the internal fans, overheating was never an issue. If there's anything that I was worried about between these cameras, it's the open ports on the FX2 for the microphone and headphone jack, whereas on the Sony FX30, they have covers for them. Sony says both of these cameras are weather sealed against dust and moisture, but I'm not willing to test it out myself. However, I did see a couple videos of people shooting with the FX2 in the snow, and it seemed to have no problems. For photography, both of these cameras last a whole day on one battery, but I always keep a second. When it comes to switching back and forth between photo and video, the Sony FX2 is the better experience, thanks to the switch that it has. While both can shoot horizontal and vertical orientation, I use the same FX30 style cage by Falcam on both cameras, since Falcam doesn't make a cage for the FX2. But even if you don't use the same cage as me, will you get the Sony XLR handle? As someone who likes a lower profile setup, I usually combine my Sony setup with something like a Rode Wireless Pro or a DJI Mic 2. If you do use the XLR handle, it's going to be great for low shots, plus having that XLR option for audio. But in the end, what is the ultimate cost when choosing either of these cameras? When it comes to budget, this is where the FX30 makes its strongest case. At $2,098 US, plus a lens like the Sigma 17 to 40mm f1.8 at $919, which I'm currently using to film this video, that's about $3,017 for a camera and an excellent constant f1.8 zoom lens. It's going to be ready to shoot almost anything. The FX2 body alone is $2,699 US. Pair it with something like the Sigma 28 to 105mm f2.8, like what I use, you're already at $4,198 US. That, I would say, is my go-to setup, but it's not a setup I can recommend to everybody. For beginners or for creators just starting out but still want the best video for the price, the Sony FX30 is a great entry level while still having a bunch more options for lenses. The FX2, while superior in many ways, is a big investment because of the expensive lens choices. If you don't already own full-frame lenses or don't have it in your budget, the FX30 may be what fits your needs. But if you're already in the Sony full-frame ecosystem, the Sony FX2 is an excellent hybrid camera for photo and video. That's why if you had to choose between the FX30 and the FX2, I would say for most people, if you film events, do video for a living, or just want a premium camera experience, the Sony FX30 is going to be the one that checks most of the boxes. Not too many people actually need full frame, and the value that the FX30 provides is just hard to beat. If you do end up getting the FX2, you won't be disappointed with it, unless you're debating between this and the A7 IV, which is another video that you'll have to subscribe for.